The overnight shift years in the making. It looked sudden from the outside. One day, the market felt familiar. The next, everything had changed. Headlines called it an overnight shift, a rapid transformation no one saw coming. But the truth was far quieter, far slower, and far more deliberate than anyone realized. Nothing meaningful changes overnight. This shift had been forming for years, hidden beneath habits, assumptions, and systems that worked just well enough to avoid scrutiny. Companies believed they were prepared because nothing was broken. Customers adapted because they always had. And the industry convinced itself that stability meant alignment. In reality, it meant delay. To understand how this transformation unfolded, we need to go back to the earliest signals, long before the headlines, long before the panic. Small changes in behavior, new expectations expressed indirectly, subtle frustration masked as loyalty. The market wasn't demanding change yet, but it was rehearsing for it. Inside the company at the center of this story, those signals appeared as background noise. Engagement metrics shifted slightly. Feature adoption patterns changed without explanation. Power users explored workarounds that bypassed intended flows. Nothing alarming, nothing urgent, but together, they told a story few were prepared to hear. The leadership team noticed the patterns, but struggled to interpret them. The data didn't point to failure. It pointed to evolution. And evolution is harder to act on in crisis. Acting too early feels foolish. Acting too late is fatal. So the company waited, not out of ignorance, but out of caution. They refined what worked. They optimized what existed. They protected the model that had delivered years of success. And while they focused on incremental improvement, the market quietly practiced moving on. This is where reveal begins. Because the overnight shift wasn't triggered by a single event. It was triggered by a tipping point. The moment when years of ignored signals aligned and change accelerated faster than any system designed for stability could respond. And when that moment arrived, it didn't ask for permission. It rewrote the rules. As the signals accumulated, the shift gained momentum beneath the surface. Customers didn't announce their changing expectations. They adapted quietly. They tolerated friction a little less. They compared experiences a little more. They began expecting speed, flexibility, and intuition as defaults, not bonuses. And each small adjustment nudged the market further away from the systems built to serve the past. The reveal deepened. Inside the company, teams noticed inconsistencies they couldn't quite explain. Features that once drove engagement now felt flat. Updates delivered on time, but landed without excitement. Feedback became harder to interpret. Less about what was broken, more about what felt missing. The product still worked, but it no longer felt ahead. Attempts to respond stayed cautious. Minor refinements, polished interfaces, optimized workflows. Each improvement made the system more efficient, but none addressed the deeper shift underway. Efficiency masked misalignment. And because nothing failed outright, urgency never arrived. Meanwhile, outside the company, competitors experimented more aggressively. Some failed publicly. Others learned quickly. New entrants ignored old assumptions entirely, building experiences shaped around emerging behavior instead of legacy constraints. Their growth looked erratic at first, uneven, unpredictable, but it carried the energy of alignment. Tension surfaced when the company ran its first serious comparison tests. Users consistently preferred the flexibility offered by newer alternatives, even when those alternatives were less polished. Speed mattered more than perfection. Freedom mattered more than familiarity. The data wasn't damning, but it was directional. And direction, once established, is hard to reverse. The conflict intensified. Teams debated whether the shift justified structural change. Some argued that trends fluctuate and patience would restore equilibrium. Others warned that patience had already cost them their edge. Leadership hesitated, caught between protecting what still worked and investing in something unproven. Then came the moment that removed doubt. A long-standing client quietly announced their transition away from the platform. Not because of price, not because of failure, but because their own customers had changed faster than the system could support. It wasn't a dramatic exit. It was calm, rational, final. That decision rippled internally, like a shockwave. The overnight shift was no longer theoretical. It had arrived. And the company now faced a brutal truth. Years of preparation without action had only delayed the inevitable. The market had finished rehearsing. The performance was about to begin. The departure changed everything. What once felt like distant signals now carried weight. The shift was no longer happening around the company. It was happening to it. Conversations turned sharper. Metrics were re-examined with urgency. And the comfort that had protected decision-making for years evaporated overnight. The conflict erupted inside the organization. Some teams demanded immediate transformation. Others warned that moving too fast would break systems built on years of interdependence. Engineers highlighted fragile architecture. Product leaders argued that half measures would fail. Operations feared service instability. Every group was right, and that made the choice even harder. The emotional peak built as leadership confronted an unforgiving reality. The company had optimized itself into a corner. Its processes assumed predictability. Its infrastructure resisted change. Its culture rewarded caution. And now, the market demanded speed. A rapid response team was assembled. Their mandate was simple and terrifying. Adapt fast enough to survive. They mapped the system end to end, identifying the bottleneck stability had hidden. Approval chains, legacy dependencies, rigid workflows that assumed yesterday's behavior would continue tomorrow. What they found was sobering. Change wasn't blocked by a single flaw. It was blocked by layers of decisions made when speed mattered less than certainty. Every safeguard added over the years now acted as friction. The system wasn't broken. It was perfectly designed for a world that no longer existed. Tension reached its peak during a live stress test. As the team pushed the system to support the new behaviors customers demanded, failures appeared in cascading waves. Not catastrophic, but compounding. Delays triggered workarounds. Workarounds created errors. Errors eroded trust. The simulation revealed what reality soon would. The current foundation could not support the shift, no matter how well it was tuned. There was no incremental path forward. No small adjustment that could buy time. The choice was stark. Either preserve stability and accept decline, or dismantle the very structure that defined the company's success and rebuild under pressure. Silence filled the room as the implications settled. Because once they chose to rebuild, the overnight shift would no longer be something that happened to them. It would be something they had to survive from the inside. They chose to rebuild, not because the timing was right, but because the timing no longer mattered. The overnight shift had already arrived, and stability had lost its power to protect them. What remained was a single option: adapt fast enough to matter again. The reconstruction began beneath the surface, away from announcements and reassurance. Legacy dependencies were isolated and removed. Approval chains collapsed into smaller, faster decision loops. Teams once separated by rigid roles began working side by side, focused not on preserving the past, but enabling the future. The system resisted at first. Years of optimization do not disappear quietly, but gradually momentum returned. As the foundation changed, the product responded differently to user behavior. Features no longer fought flexibility. Updates moved faster. Feedback loops shortened. The company stopped guessing what the market wanted and started responding to what it was already doing. What once felt like chaos began to feel like alignment. This was the climax. The overnight shift revealed its true nature. It was never a single moment. It was a release of pressure that had been building for years. And by dismantling the structures that delayed action, the company didn't just survive the shift, it entered it with purpose. In the resolution, the lesson became clear. Transformation feels sudden only to those who waited too long. To those paying attention, the signals were always there, rehearsing quietly in the background. Stability had hidden them. Comfort had delayed response. But once the shift arrived, clarity replaced hesitation. The market moved on because it had to. The company moved with it because it finally chose to. And in the end, the overnight shift didn't reward speed alone. It rewarded the courage to let go of systems that once worked, so something better could finally take their place. Sometimes the future doesn't arrive loudly. It simply stops waiting. The